For the first time in over 20 years, China is no longer America's #1 trading partner. Someone else just took the top spot, and believe it or not, it wasn't Canada. A huge shift is happening right now, with companies pulling their operations out of China and moving them closer to the US. But instead of this investment flowing north to Canada, it's all going south to Mexico. Why? It all ties back to the massive economic battle between the US and China. This trade conflict has created a new set of rules for North America, and Canada is getting squeezed out. But the best part is coming up, where we reveal the one card Canada still has left to play, and it's buried deep underground. Is Canada on the verge of being permanently left behind as the forgotten partner of North America? Let me tell you something you probably didn't know. There's a massive economic conflict going on between the two biggest economies on the planet, the United States and China. And while they're throwing punches, their quiet neighbor to the north, Canada, is the one getting a black eye. It's a wild story of how being friends with everyone can suddenly mean you're trapped by everyone. Canada is in an impossible position, and the reason why is built into the very foundation of its economy. How is this happening? You see, Canada's entire economic life depends on two countries that are now bitter rivals. It's a classic squeeze play, and to understand it, we just have to follow the money. And believe me, the numbers are absolutely jaw-dropping. But that's just the tip of the iceberg. We're about to dive into how this global showdown is hitting the wallets of everyday people, and later, I'll reveal the hidden clause in a major trade deal that acts like a loaded gun pointed at Canada's future. You are going to want to hear this. Alright, so to really get what's happening in Canada, you have to picture its economy as a giant factory. Now, for this factory to work, it needs two things: a place to sell all the stuff it makes, and a place to buy all the parts to make it. Simple enough, right? Well, here's the catch. Canada's #1 customer, by a long shot, is the United States. Get this, a staggering 76% of everything Canada exports goes straight south across the border. We're talking about a mind-boggling $688 billion in trade flowing between the two countries every single year. For tens of thousands of Canadian businesses, America isn't just their main market. It's their only market. From the cars built in Ontario to the oil drilled in Alberta, it all heads to the US. This makes America the anchor that holds the entire Canadian economy steady. But what about the parts for the factory? Where do they come from? Increasingly, they come from China. China has become the world's workshop, and Canada is a major customer. In 2024 alone, Canada imported over $66 billion worth of goods from China. But these aren't just toys and t-shirts. We're talking about crucial electronic components, machinery, and auto parts that are essential for Canadian industries to function. So you have this perfect system. Canada buys parts from China, makes stuff, and sells it to the United States. For decades, this worked beautifully. But what happens when your biggest customer and your biggest supplier suddenly declare economic war on each other? You get caught in the crossfire. And that's exactly where our story takes a dramatic turn, because Washington just fired the first shot, and it was a big one. You see, in the spring of 2024, Washington decided it had had enough of what it called China's unfair trade practices. The US government announced a massive wall of tariffs aimed squarely at China's most important industries. This wasn't just a small tax, this was a complete game changer. The numbers were extreme. The tariff on Chinese-made electric vehicles, or EVs, was jacked up to an incredible 100%. The tax on solar panels jumped to 50%. And they announced that the tariff on high-tech semiconductors would also double to 50% in 2025. The message from the White House was clear. We are going to protect American industries from a flood of low-cost Chinese goods. Now, here's where Canada gets pulled in. With the door to the US market slammed shut, where do you think all those Chinese EVs and steel products were going to go? The next logical place was Canada. Fearing it would become a dumping ground, the Canadian government felt it had no choice but to follow America's lead. In October 2024, Ottawa announced its own 100% surtax on Chinese EVs and a 25% tax on certain Chinese steel and aluminum. They had to protect their own market and show solidarity with their biggest trading partner. It seemed like a logical move, a defensive move, but they had no idea what Beijing was about to do next. China's response wasn't just a simple tit-for-tat. It was a cold, calculated move designed to inflict maximum pain on a completely different part of the Canadian economy. And trust me, what China did next is something you won't see coming. So, did China retaliate by hitting Canadian cars or steel? Nope. That's not how they play the game. Beijing's response was way smarter and far more punishing. They decided to ignore the protected manufacturing industries in central Canada and instead aimed their economic weapons at a totally different target: the farmers of Western Canada. It was an act of precise economic warfare. In the spring of 2025, China dropped a bombshell. They slapped 100% tariffs on Canadian canola oil, peas, and a 25% tariff on Canadian pork. This was a direct hit, but they weren't done. A few months later, in August, they delivered the final blow: a crippling 75.8% anti-dumping duty on Canadian canola seed. To understand how devastating this was, you have to know that the canola industry is a beast in Canada, worth over $10 billion a year and supporting 200,000 jobs. And China was their biggest customer. The market vanished overnight. For a farmer in Manitoba, this meant the price for his crop instantly dropped, potentially wiping out $30,000 in profit. For another family farm in Alberta, they were looking at a $50,000 loss, forcing them to harvest their crop and just store it, hoping for a better day that might never come. Do you see the strategy here? By targeting farmers in the West, China created a massive political headache for the Canadian government. It turned an international dispute into a domestic crisis, pitting the interests of Western farmers against the interests of Eastern manufacturers. It was a masterclass in economic leverage. But the pain wasn't just on the farms. A hidden trap was closing around Canada's biggest industry, and it was written into a trade deal everyone thought was safe. While farmers were dealing with a direct hit, Canada's massive auto industry was facing a slower, more complicated problem. This danger wasn't a tariff from China. Truth be told, it was hidden in plain sight, deep inside the rulebook of the new NAFTA deal, the USMCA. You see, when the US, Mexico, and Canada signed this deal, the American negotiators put in some very strict new rules called rules of origin. In simple terms, these rules dictate how much of a car has to be made in North America to qualify for zero tariffs. Under the old deal, it was 62.5%. Under the new USMCA, that number jumped to 75%. On top of that, 70% of all steel and aluminum used must come from North America. This is a huge deal for Canadian auto parts makers. They have to prove that at least 3/4 of every single component they make originates right here. Using cheaper parts from China to keep costs down suddenly became incredibly risky. If a Canadian company uses too many Chinese inputs, their products no longer qualify for duty-free access to the US market and they get hit with tariffs. This forces them to completely remap their supply chains, often switching to more expensive North American suppliers. The USMCA essentially is a built-in wall against Chinese parts. But here's the most surprising part. As companies are forced to move their supply chains out of China, you'd think Canada would benefit, but it's not. For the first time in 20 years, Mexico has overtaken China as America's #1 trade partner. A wave of new investment is flooding into Mexico to build factories to serve the US market. Companies like Tesla are building massive new plants there, not in Canada. Canada, with its higher labor costs, is being squeezed out. It's a brutal 1-2 punch. The trade deal is forcing companies to leave China, but all the benefits are flowing south, not north. But all of this is just a warm-up for the real main event. A ticking time bomb set to go off in 2026 that could blow up North American trade as we know it. Looming over all of this is the biggest threat of all. It's a date on the calendar, July 1st, 2026. This is the day the USMCA trade deal comes up for its first mandatory review. But this isn't just a friendly check-in. It's a high-stakes showdown thanks to something called a Sunset Clause that US negotiators insisted on putting in the agreement. Here's how it works. On that day, all three countries, the US, Mexico, and Canada, have to formally agree to extend the deal for another 16 years. If any single country says no, the deal isn't automatically over. Instead, it enters a terrifying state of limbo with yearly reviews. And if they can't agree after 10 years of that, the entire agreement terminates. This clause effectively gives the United States a loaded gun to hold to Canada's head every 6 years. It allows the US to use the threat of tearing up the deal to demand new concessions. And with the 2026 review fast approaching, everyone expects the US to come to the table with a long list of demands. What will they ask for? They'll likely go after Canada's protected dairy market again. They'll bring up the long-standing disputes over softwood lumber. And they might even link trade to other issues, pressuring Canada to spend more on defense. Most importantly, the US will almost certainly use the review to force Canada into an even stronger anti-China alliance. They could demand more coordinated investment screening to block Chinese companies from buying into sensitive North American industries. In short, the price for Canada to maintain stable access to its most vital market could be giving up even more of its economic independence. Canada is trapped. If it sides too closely with the U.S., it faces precise and painful retaliation from China. If it tries to stay neutral, it risks angering Washington, which holds the ultimate trump card with the 2026 USMCA review. It's a strategic nightmare with no easy way out. The country is walking a tightrope between two feuding giants, and one wrong step could mean a long, long way down. What would you do if you were in Canada's shoes? Let me know in the comments below. Smash that like button and subscribe for more.